What's happening? You got the Retro Gaming Hippie. It's been a long time since I've done a video. I've been really busy with work and school and trying to stay in shape, but over the last few months, I picked up a lot of different great 80s retro goodness that I want to show you today. And then maybe I'll get back to playing some of these great games and give you some reviews of those somewhere down the road. But first, let me start off with this first pickup I got, which was when I went over to some friend's house that I set up a table next to at a swap meet a few months back, which I did a video on earlier. If you want to see that in my list, you can probably find it. And they had a whole bunch more of the things to let me look through. So I put together a nice pile of retro goodness and picked them up, and I'm going to show you what that is today. Now, there wasn't a lot of toys or games necessarily in this video games in this lot. It was definitely a mixture of 80s retro goodness. Starting off with one of the coolest things, which is from, I think, like the late 70s, are these little pocket film animation sets. And this particular one has a Spider-Man reel. You plugged a little battery in there and you held down the button and you could watch this animation clip with no sound of Spider-Man, in this case, against the Green Goblin. They also had a lot of different ones you could buy, films of Flintstones and Mighty Mouse and Submariner. This wasn't something I really saw as a kid. I do recall seeing maybe a Star Wars version of this that looked a bit different, not made by Ideal, but definitely a cool thing to kind of pick up. It's in box, a very beat up box, but the item itself, obviously never played with. Now, one thing they did have a ton of was board games. And what I love about the board games is you get the story of a movie that you didn't get to have toys with. In this case, one of the first ones they saw, a very underrated 80s film, Krull. Now, Krull didn't have any licensed toys that I'm aware of, or really much in the way of anything you could play with other than maybe this board game. There were some comics probably, or coloring books or merchandise of that sort, but not a lot came out with that. And so I definitely had to throw that in the pile. Sticking to more of the board games, you got the A.T. with Mr. T. Battlestar Galactica, another one of my favorite 80s shows. 80s era, Legend of Lone Ranger. I don't think this was based necessarily on the movie, but the movie had the same title that came out back in that time, and not the newer one you might have seen with Johnny Depp and I don't know who else was in it. This one was late 80s, or early 80s when it came out, I think 81. And the funny thing about the guy who was the Lone Ranger, actually I believe had his voice dubbed over because they didn't like how it sounded. But although this isn't based on that movie, like I said, I don't believe, it's a really cool game with a lot of different moving parts to it. Same with that little 80s era is Tarzan. And last but not least in that pile up from them, Centurions, which was a late 80s or early 90s toy line that I never got into. I just was aware of what they were, and I love the graphics of board games. Of course, I threw that on the pile. I wish they had more of this board game, but all they had were the directions. And that was, of course, Alien, if you didn't see that, the original Alien, and then the board itself. Down the road, I will probably pick up the rest because Alien is a super great film. One of the best movies I think ever made. Of course, I love my Dungeons & Dragons. They had some of these module books that I'm not really familiar with on this, but it was Dungeons & Dragons, so of course I'm going to pick that up from them. Another 80s throwback that I absolutely love are these things called wax packs. Now, they had a few sealed wax packs, Battlestar Galactica, RoboCop 2, and ALF, but then they had a lot of the sets complete with cards and stickers such as Alien, my guilty pleasure of a 90s film, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner, Tron, Jaws 2, and last but not least with the complete set, The Black Hole. There were a few other little miscellaneous things that I picked up from them but were super cool, like this old Wendy the Good Witch Halloween candy bucket. Sticking with my memorabilia, Battlestar Galactica. This is actually an ad for the record album that you would probably hang from the ceiling somewhere. Just a cool little piece to kind of come across and find. And a little spatter of miscellaneous toys or accessories, I guess I could say. Crossbows and catapults accessories, such as the disc, caroms, and the flag, which I own. Crossbows and catapults complete set. And the few figures they had, and one I don't have here in the fixture, they had this guy's from Mask. I couldn't tell you his name off the top of my head. Neither could I say about this. It's a Dino Rider. and some little plastic pallet toy that just looked kind of cool, and a couple of muscle men. And ironically, they had a Quick Kick from G.I. Joe, which is probably hanging out somewhere back there because they use them in the ads, but that was the only more modern figure that they had, was a Quick Kick figure in there. And there are a couple other things that I don't have here today. I piled that all up together, and I ended up paying $100 for everything, which I thought was a really good deal. She initially said 80, and I said I was going to pay 100 to begin with, so we'll make it 100. And I will set up another time and day to go back over there and look through a bunch more other stuff that I didn't get a chance to at that point. So then I moved on to one of my favorite little collectible antique mall stores, Dusty Tiger's Collectibles. It's on McLaughlin here in Milwaukee area. Great guy that runs the place. I can't remember his name, but I always talk to him for a great amount of time. He's a super cool guy. Always find something usually there. And he has a cool Star Wars setup that's all his personal stuff. And this particular day, he hit my sweet spot with one of his vendors had wrestling stuff. And they had a sealed box, but it is torn. But the cards are all sealed of WCW cards, which are not extremely popular or sought after, but I mean, it is a sealed box of them. And next to it, it had also this WCW coloring book and activity, Big Papa Pump. That's exactly what I want to color. And then last but not least, the coolest thing behind it, I believe this was the comic that the Warrior made the WWF buy a ton of to bring him back and produce. And so this was the #1 from that. And this was all listed there with a price I thought was $5 each. And I was like, $5 each, I'll buy it. And it turned out it was $5 for all 3 of those items. So I was like, man, what a score. That was one of his vendors that had set up there. And, you know, it's one of those places I hit all the time. So that was one of my favorite scores because I love the wrestling. But probably the biggest score I got, and this was one after the other, and there goes away my spending budget, was this Commodore 64 lot that came up. And I won't be able to show you all of it because there's so much of it. But one of the things that I definitely wanted, and the only reason why I did end up buying it, was the last game in the Gold Box collection that I did not have, and that's Death Knights of Krynn. Now, of course, it also had the whole Gold Box set, which are, like I said, I already had all of them except for this one, so this just becomes resale or trade bait. The cool thing about this setup is they also included all the clue books, which were something you would get from TSR that was basically a guidebook back in the day produced by them. So you would see how to navigate through the game, where certain things were, maps and things like that. I'll show you an example of one from Pool of Radiance that looks like that. And it's the clue book that was officially licensed by SSI to go with them. And they all included that. I'll show you a few more highlights from that. Like I said, that was a very big lot. This Commodore 64 lot ended up being $450 is what he was asking, which I thought was a very fair price for everything that was there. It included, which is hooked up, and because I was testing it, the second version of the Commodore 64, I believe, with disk drive, power supply, and all that, which was the white one. I have the bread box one that I'm going to keep. I'll probably end up selling or trading off the white one, but I had it hooked up and it's tested and worked out really well. It had a ton of RPG games, of course. If you're an RPG Commodore 64 person, Might and Magic 1 and 2. These are pretty much complete. I haven't went through them fully, but I think they are missing a few things here and there, and I haven't tested them out, of course. Ultimate Trilogy 1, 2, and 3. I never played that back in the game, but I'm very familiar with the game itself, and I'll probably hold on to these and give them a play down the road and see how they compare to the D&D games that I love on the C64. Ultima 5 and Ultima 4 and Bard's Tale 1 and 2. And last but not least in the RPG realm, which was probably, I'm going to guess, maybe a precursor to the Fallout series that I've never played, but that is extremely popular. But it's one called Wasteland that appears to be a role-playing type of game, but set, you know, in a nuclear wasteland. Made by Electronic Arts, which is definitely a very solid company as far as making of games, in my opinion. That lot also had like 6 different controllers, a ton of other games and software that I haven't shown you. It's a big box, lots of manuals and books. I mean, it was just a huge lot of C64 stuff, and I definitely had to sweep that up so I could complete my gold box collection. And now I'm a happy gamer with a lot of extra stuff to do something with. So those were some of the pickups I've gotten in the last 2 or 3 months, amongst a few other things that I didn't get a chance to show you because I cycled through stuff here and there. It's just been a really good last few months of picking up items. So Next up, I should do a game review again. I need to hit up that Commodore 64 and play through one of my old games, such as, I think I'm up on Curse of the Azorbon should be next for me in that series. So if you like these pickup videos, just let me know in the like or comments section down below. I have tons of things that I always pick up that I don't always talk about, and sometimes I don't get a chance to before they go right through my fingers. So remember, I'm Retro Gaming Hippie, and I don't buy nostalgia because, well, I am nostalgia.